Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to Sky News.
I am delighted to be here, David.
Good.
I'm happy to deal with the content of campaigns because I think campaigns matter, and this is shaping up to be an enormous contest, both in length and the policies that we have on the table. I'm out of my comfort zone. This is my first time in the press gallery.
This is what I wanted to ask you. First time in the press gallery, not just the first time doing a television interview.
16 years I've set foot in the press gallery.
You've worked in this building a long time, but you've never been up here. So
no,
good to see you up here. All right, well, I wanted to ask you, we've had 7 or 8 months where a lot has been written, a lot has been said about you, but how have you dealt with this? What have you been up to, and why are you now wanting to make an on-air contribution?
I think you have to go back even beyond 7 months to say there's a lot being said about me, written about me, in my voice but not of my voice. I've used the time since September to have a decent break. These jobs are relentless, you know that, and turnover is high. To have lasted 16 years is a long stint, and I've slept. I've learnt to read for pleasure for the first time in a long time. After much waiting around for my poor old mum, I took her on a trip to Europe and I got back during the week. I went with 3 70-year-olds who play pretty hard. I've got a sore throat and come up worse than them,
right.
But it's been a great break, and I'm really looking forward to the campaign.
All right, so why do you feel this is the time to start doing commentary for the first time? I mean, some might see this as you trying to get some revenge on Malcolm Turnbull or set the record straight. I mean, why are you wanting to offer some commentary now? Well,
to have offered commentary previously, 16 years as a staffer, wouldn't have been appropriate.
No.
Now, people would often say that my voice was in things. It wasn't. I didn't play the game as a spinner. I wasn't a press sec. I've always been a policy analyst. The decision to join the Sky team came at an approach at the right time. I was ready, I'd had the break, and I wanted to make a contribution. I think I've got a lot of insights that I can add to Sky. I mean, you have, without a doubt, the best political coverage in ordinary time. You've been the wallpaper of every office that I've ever worked for, and particularly in campaigns, people will look to Sky for the insights and the analysis.
I'm hardly going to challenge you on any of that, but should some Liberals be nervous at all about seeing Peta Credlin on TV talking about things and telling it straight?
I must say that when the announcement was made that I was joining Sky, I got more phone calls than I probably have in the last 7 months, wishing me good luck and, you know, starting up the contact.
People you hadn't heard from a while?
Yeah, quite a few, quite a few. But I'm a Liberal. I've always been a Liberal.
You're a fierce political warrior, according to Tony Abbott.
I believe in the things today that I did yesterday that my party stands for. I think this is going to be a contest where it really will be old Labor, unreconstructed Labor against the coalition. There's a record there that the government will run on in this campaign that I have been a part of building in that 16 years, a proud record. And I also think that both Malcolm Turnbull, Julie Bishop, Barnaby Joyce, Scott Morrison will put their own flavour to what the offering is on the 2nd of July. And both those things will be measured, the forward plan and the record, by the Australian people.
Now, I want to come back to that and how this campaign is shaping up and some of the key figures on both sides and how you rate them. I'll be interested to hear as well. Grab a tissue because we know, as you say, you've just been struggling with the cold. But I do want to go back to your time as Chief of Staff with Tony Abbott, the way you ran that office and the way you worked with Tony Abbott. Now, I'm not interested in some of the stuff that's been written and said, but I do want to ask whether you agree you exerted more power and control than you should have.
I think the job of Chief of Staff is a tough job. You can see that it matters if it's not working. You can see where there is lack of consistency in messages, where the government may have the right policies but it's not cutting through to the electorate, or where it's made commitments at an election and doesn't deliver on them. There's a lot said about my time as Chief of Staff, but very few commentators have ever said she wasn't smart enough, she wasn't up to the job, she didn't get things done. In fact, it's the reverse. So if I have to cop some criticism, maybe I banged a few heads too hard or demanded in the Prime Minister's name, everything that ministers or backbenchers had promised their electorates, then I'll cop that.
But
I'll
some have gone much beyond that. Some former staff members in your office have gone on the record to say you were far too controlling. Even workplace bullying has been mentioned as well. And people put their names to this. Do you accept any of that, and why are they saying these things?
I will never say everything was right, David. Right? I have a reputation for straight talking and candour. I'm sure there are things that I wish, and I did wish, coming home some nights I could have handled a little better, but the results speak for themselves. The lack of turnover in the office speaks for itself. I mean, the vast majority, 2/3 of our office, joined Team Abbott in 2009 when very few people gave Tony Abbott any chance of success. We went to the 2010 election. This gallery, now that I've seen it for the first time, was full of pundits who said that Abbott would implode, he'd blow up, he wouldn't go anywhere. Well, it took us to an election that gave us a hung parliament. So that sort of endeavour, that sort of effort, that focus, and then winning government in a landslide doesn't happen by magic.
But government is very different to opposition, isn't it? You had great success in opposition, but lasted just 2 years in government. Did the transition work? Did the transition fail?
I think the transition has to be measured on the achievements of the government. So free trade agreements that had been languishing for 10 years, stopping the boats when everyone said that couldn't be done, 300,000 new jobs, starting the very important job of budget repair. And to date, I've been a bit disappointed that that focus has slipped away from the commentary. I think that is at the forefront of the election issues we're about to come and debate. But there are things that I'm sure could have been handled better, and I know Tony Abbott has written on that himself.
Well, like what, from your perspective?
I think that Tony Abbott has made comments about just handling some of the issues that riled colleagues. First-class travel, I don't think anyone in the Australian community would say that wasn't the right decision. We could have probably handled that a little bit better. Employment of family members by MPs doesn't pass the pub test, but again, colleagues got their feathers ruffled. I don't think it's my job now to go through and add anything more.
But
to what
I'm
the
just
Prime Minister has said
fair enough.
today.
He's cited those. Tony Abbott has cited those areas and a few others as well. But I'm more interested in your role and your self-reflection, I suppose, and response to some of the criticism, because it's also been MPs, backbenchers, and frontbenchers who are complaining to Tony Abbott that, and when we saw very publicly on camera when you gave Stuart Robert a dressing down as well. Reports that other ministers were in fairly heated argument with you as well. Did you see that as the role of a Chief of Staff to talk that way to frontbenchers, or was that overstepping the mark?
I wouldn't say there was raised voices at any time. Honestly, David, it was more conversations that needed to be had about shaping out cabinet submissions that weren't up to speed, or meeting commitments and coordinating media, and the job of a Chief of Staff. I mean, Arthur Sinodinos, other Chiefs of Staff before and after Arthur haven't done it any differently.
But where does the Chief of Staff sit in the pecking order, I guess, is what I'm getting at. What's your perspective on that?
The Chief of Staff sits in the pecking order wherever the Prime Minister wants them to sit.
And where did Tony Abbott want you to sit?
In the end, the authority of a Chief of Staff comes from a Prime Minister, and Tony Abbott has always said if he's got people in the room, he wants them to speak up. Otherwise, they shouldn't be in the room.
So did Tony Abbott empower you to be effectively more senior than everyone else?
I'd argue I wasn't more senior than anybody else. I wasn't more senior than anybody else. I was in the place where a Chief of Staff should sit. Look, I was often criticised if there was a photograph of me sitting behind Tony Abbott or me sitting in a chair in a meeting overseas. I was sitting in the chair that had always been the Chief of Staff's chair. But when you're 6'1", female, you
noticed.
Long hair and like to smile a bit.
You did also
well,
say...
You're going to get a photo.
You also said in September, soon after Tony Abbott lost the leadership, that if I wasn't strong, determined, controlling and got them into government from opposition, I might add, then I would be weak and not up to it. I mean, did you think that you got them into government?
I was part of a great team that worked hard to get them into government. And a lot of those new members who fought the hard fight in 2013 are now focused on the fight that's before them now. And it comes down to, yes, effective staff at great campaign headquarters, but it comes down to that seat-by-seat war, which we're going to spend a lot of time, I hope, over the next 8 weeks unravelling for people so that they can see how a local decision in their electorate can influence a national result, and enough seats that go the way of Labor changes this country.
Now, what about the relationship with Julie Bishop? It's been described sometimes as frosty between the two of you, was it?
No. I have enormous regard for Julie Bishop. I would say through the whole 6 years when we worked the most close, I mean, I knew her in the Howard government, of course, but when she was the deputy and Tony Abbott was the leader, it was a great relationship I had with her, professional. I'd even say it's warm, and I'm pleased to see today she's been out campaigning with Sarah Hennison in Corangamite. I grew up in Geelong. It's a critical seat, and the more we can get Julie out in the campaign, the better.
Was it a mistake to have just the one female in that first cabinet?
That's a decision for the Prime Minister.
Did you have any say on that?
I think I've been pretty vocal about where I see the place of women in politics, and it's right in the middle. You know, I am wanting parties, our party, my party in particular, to put women up for pre-selection and get women candidates, because without women candidates, they don't become ministers, and if they're not ministers, they don't get into cabinet. So the pipeline is critical. I think it's important in this campaign. One of the things I really want to pull people up on is so-called women's issues. I mean, the economy is a woman's issue. National security is a woman's issue. I didn't have a pink in tray on my desk where all the women's issues went to, and after running and moving all the bits and pieces across my desk, you suddenly got to the women's issues. I want the issues of this campaign that matter to women to be as forefront in the debate as what the blokes are talking about.
So let me ask you this, Peta Credlin, if everything was fine with Julie Bishop, if there weren't these sort of shouting matches with other ministers, why is it then, and there wasn't the turnover of staff that some have written about, why is it that MPs, senior party figures, some senior business figures, I mean the likes of Rupert Murdoch, even John Howard, were telling Tony Abbott, you've got to get rid of Peta Credlin. Why do you think that was?
Well, Rupert doesn't have an issue because I'm on Sky News and I'm writing for his papers. So
he doesn't now?
He does it now, so let's put Rupert to one side.
But he was pretty public back then.
Yeah, I think people that had wanted to see a change of government from the Rudd-Gillard years wanted us to do well, and they wanted us to do well with pretty significant expectations from day one. So when the commitments were met, like stopping the boats, people had banked them and moved on, right? And they wanted to see more commitments outlined and met and quickly. So there wasn't, I don't think, the opportunity for much of a honeymoon. That's politics. Was there unfair criticism? Sure, but politics is politics, and I'm pretty tough and resilient. I think the challenge for us always was giving confidence to the people on the backbench that if they worked hard and followed the strategy, their seats would be safe, and I maintain they would have been. But people got nervous, and nervous politicians in the party room make the decision, not commentators like you and not staff like me.
Did you ever think about going though?
I think I found it tough at times. You know, as I said, I've done this job for 16 years, or did that job for 16 years. See, I've got to make that transition. I did that job for 16 years, and you don't last for 16 years if you don't have a record and experience and something to be proud of. And
did you feel...
I found the criticism really personal at sometimes, and I have no trouble being measured on competency and record. And I'll never say we were perfect, and certainly never say that I was perfect. But when it got really personal and pointed, yeah, I found that tough.
Did you feel Tony Abbott couldn't do the job without you? And did he feel that way as well? Because that's been another suggestion.
That's rubbish, because anyone who sat in a meeting with Tony Abbott, National Security Committee or a Budget Committee, they knew that Tony Abbott ran that government. I mean, I often say to people, what's the difference, they say, with leaders and the public service or the machine that runs government? And it's leadership, its resolve. Prior to September 2013, every official that sat around the National Security Committee table were part of a government that couldn't stop the votes. After the election, they were part of a government that did stop the votes. And that was Tony Abbott's leadership. It was a terrific plan put together with a lot of work by Scott Morrison and others. But the resolve and the leadership from the boss at the table delivered those results. That's his government.
He's reflected on where he thinks he could have done things better, or where things went wrong or mistakes were made. You two, you have as well here today. Was he also undermined, though? Is that your view, that he was undermined by colleagues?
I don't think Malcolm Turnbull stayed around after he lost the leadership and returned to the Parliament, or decided not to resign, to be anyone's minister. I mean, Malcolm is now the Prime Minister, and he's got a big campaign to fight. He has my support. He has my support as a Liberal. But I am frank and I am honest, and I'll call it how I see it.
You think he always wanted the job back, or the leadership back in the Prime Ministership?
Anyone in politics who's in the lower house thinks they can be Prime Minister one day, and I think Malcolm's made his ambitions for the job well known throughout his life. He's in the job now. He is putting together a very strong platform for the election campaign. It's not a question of Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull anymore. It's a question of Bill Short and Malcolm Turnbull. It's a question of Labor versus Liberal.
And we'll get to that. When the leadership change happened, Malcolm Turnbull comes in, new team. Were you offered any sort of job by Malcolm Turnbull or someone in the government?
Yeah, I noticed a story at the start of the year about the sex discrimination job. I think it was mooted that I was after the job. I had an approach from a very senior Liberal just going into Christmas, and I made it clear that I wouldn't accept any job. I want to stand on my own merit. I intend to be with you for the campaign and take a commercial offer towards the end of the year and into the commercial world, and that's where I see I've got something to contribute.
So you're not interested in any sort of government work at this stage?
There could be something down the track in many years' time where the government thinks my skills stand up to it, but I make my own way, David. And
pre-selection politics, is it completely off the table for you?
I have ruled that out for I don't know how many years.
Many times, I know you have. Yeah. All right, well, let's look at where things are at now. We've seen, of course, the government's stocks fall since September. We've seen Malcolm Turnbull's popularity come down as well, and they're just about to get into a campaign tomorrow. How do you think Malcolm Turnbull and his government has been performing, and what chance do you give it of actually winning the election?
I'll apply a discount factor to sort of those very high numbers that Malcolm had coming in. You're always going to get that with a leadership change, and we've seen that before. I think government's tough. I think managing a party is tough, and I think that always takes skin off leaders. I am confident that if the government is prepared to utilise fully the record left by Tony Abbott right across the board, I mean, I don't think we're hearing enough about the issues in Manus and boats, and I know Peter Dutton is valiantly reminding people of what would happen to our borders if Labor was to get in charge again. I think that's got to be a mainstay of the government's message.
Ramp that up as an issue?
Oh, I would. I mean, it's the economy and it's security, it's job security and national security and community security. I mean, down there in Corangamite, I've got family still, and the last few days the Geelong Advertiser has been running about local streets and safety and crime, and that's the bread and butter stuff that people are concerned about. And I think it's really important for the government that their language, that their communication, that their messaging is in the terms that everyone can come with them on and understand the issues and follow the policies that they're outlining, because in the end, we're not trying to win leafy suburbs, and we're not trying to win what we would call the dead reds, or the seats that are very much known to be long-standing Labor seats. Both sides are trying to contest that middle ground, the marginal seat, and by their very nature, they're seats that are used to swinging for the government or against the government.
See, a lot has been said about about Malcolm Turnbull. A lot was said about him being such a great communicator when he came in, and there's no doubt, he can explain things quite well. Is there quite a difference, do you think, between Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull on the communication front? Were there ways that Tony Abbott could have communicated better as well, do you think, done more? He made reference to this himself, done more of the long-form, newspaper or broadcast interviews.
I think you've got to mix it up. I think that there is certainly strength to Malcolm's delivery, absolute strength. He has qualities in that longer-form delivery that I would say Tony probably wished he had. But I think on the other side, some of Tony's message discipline, consistency, and I guess day in, day out, dogged delivery are things that I think the government will now pick up on in the campaign.
Are they three-word slogans, or is that actually something that works?
I think Canberra insiders have got to get out of their bubble, because we're all consuming this stuff 24/7. If you're busy at home and you're working, you've got kids, you've got a job, you only get snatches of this campaign, and the repetition of the message is critical, so that at the end of the day, going into that polling booth, you can at least put 4 or 5 thoughts together. What does this side stand for, and what's this side got to offer? And if you're not consistent in your message, if you're not speaking in plain English and simple terms, not dumbing down, because they'll punish you for being patronising, you haven't got a hope. So,
what about on the policy
important
front? We've seen Malcolm Turnbull now, particularly in the budget, move on a few areas that certainly Tony Abbott didn't. Superannuation, reining in tax breaks for the wealthy. Tony Abbott called that the seniors tax. The cigarette excise, matching what Labor's doing there. Tony Abbott called that the workers tax. What do you think about the policy offering that Malcolm Turnbull has taken to the election?
I think Scott Morrison should be commended on the budget. There was certainly a lot of pressure. I was in Los Angeles last week at a conference watching it remotely, but I thought he pulled it off. I thought he laid a good foundation for the campaign. Very difficult budget, so closely up against the start of the campaign. I think the measures on the table are the measures you'd expect to see, and there certainly was plenty of dropped hints coming to Gary's way as to what would be there. I think the one issue that might be tricky for them in the next few weeks, see how it goes, is the retrospectivity of the superannuation. I mean, Tony Abbott very much ruled out any adverse changes. I think every government, Malcolm's government, has got their right to shape the policy in any way they like. They need to be consistent with Tony's policies as he left them, but he is his own man. He can choose his own policy. I don't think the issue is the changes of superannuation or the changes proposed. I think it's a retrospectivity that might cause them some grief.
Now, what about on the Labor side? How do you rate Bill Shorten's performance and, I guess, the sort of threat he will pose to the government in the campaign?
I think it's clear, my view and the view of other commentators out there today when I went through the media, is that they've certainly sharpened up their act. I think they are in it to win it. I think it's the government's to lose, but they're not to be underestimated. We saw what happened in 2010 when everyone underestimated Tony Abbott, and a really disciplined campaign can win your government.
So you think Bill Shorten can win?
I think if you look at the polls where they are now, I think you look at the fact that this is a first-time campaign for both leaders. I think the fact that it's a 54-odd day campaign, much longer than usual. I tell you, 33 days is hard. I couldn't imagine a 54-day slog. Hard work. This campaign, more than any other campaign in recent history, will matter more because so much of it will turn on how the performances are during the campaign, how the machines for both sides will run the ground war in marginal seats, and how the lead characters, ministers, shadow ministers, will perform. When
you were there in Tony Abbott's office, did you think Bill Shorten could win? Or, I mean, I'm told your view was he was unelectable. And that,
who told you that?
Well, I'm told, I'm not going to reveal, but I'm told that was your view, that Shorten was unelectable.
I never had that view. I never had that view. I had a lot of personal interactions with Bill Shorten in his office. His office was far more professional than previous
So you thought back then he might be able to win an election?
I thought that he had an office that was supporting him and was professional, really outstanding office. I also thought that he had started to bring the unity and the discipline into his team. I also thought in my personal interactions with him one-on-one that he has a likeability, an earthiness, a genuineness, that if he was able to work that into his public presentations, he'd be formidable.
And what
that's
about the other key players in Labor's top order? Who have you always seen as a standout performer, someone the government's a bit worried about, or should be?
I think that in a campaign there's two sorts of sort of political weapons you need, personality weapons. You need the steady hand who you can throw into a policy announcement or an issue relatively quickly, who's got good head on detail and can run the numbers or certainly make some detailed policy points. That's critical. And then you also need the people that can run a very strong communication message and have the capacity to get on the ground and fight it hard in marginal seats. I noticed, straight out of the budget, Anthony Albanese on Thursday was down in Dunkley, retiring member, the much-loved Bruce Bilson. That will be a seat that's critical to the return of the government. Albanese is down there making announcements and hitting the ground pretty hard. I think Albanese is not to be underestimated as a street fighter, yes, but a good retail politician. And I've always admired Penny Wong. She's great across the detail and she's numit when some aren't so numit.
Final question, Peta Credlin, your old boss Tony Abbott. What role do you see for him over the course of the campaign? How do you think he has, or what do you think of the contributions he's made since September?
Tony's on the record this week, I think, on Sky while I was away, saying he will do whatever's asked of him. He's very focused on the choice that will be between Labor and the coalition, and as a former Prime Minister, he's always said he owes the party more than the party owes him. So I think you'll see a very strong campaign from Tony Abbott, but a very supportive campaign.
Peta Credlin, great to talk to you, and we look forward to more of your insights and your contributions throughout this campaign. In fact, we might even be talking to you tomorrow once the campaign formally gets underway.
I'm delighted to be here and I'm delighted to join the team, Dave.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll take a quick break.